Okay, we're live. Welcome to our electronic committee of the whole meeting on December the 8th, 2020. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, Regional Council is practicing physical distancing. In an attempt to speed things up, we've assigned a mover and a seconder for all recommendations contained within the agenda package. I'll read these out at the appropriate time, and then I will state the result of the vote. We'll now perform the roll call. I'll call on Jessica to do that.
Councillor Armstrong? Councillor Armstrong? Councillor Clark?
Here.
Councillor Erb?
Here.
Councillor Foxton?
Present.
Councillor Galloway?
Present.
Councillor Harris?
Present.
Councillor Jaworski?
Here.
Councillor Jowett?
Here.
Councillor Kiefer?
Here.
Councillor Lawrence?
Here.
Councillor McGarry?
Present.
Councillor Nowak?
Present.
Chair Redmond? Here. Councillor Shantz?
Here.
Councillor Strickland? Councillor Strickland? And Councillor Verbanovich?
Present.
Missing is Councillor Strickland and Les Armstrong.
Okay, thank you. I think we have word from Councillor Strickland that he will be here sometime late in the morning if we are still in process. I'll ask if there are any declarations of pecuniary interest. And where's my, oh, here it is. Okay, seeing none. We do have some delegations today. We have 3 delegations, 2 that registered before the deadline, 1 after. So the first 2 will have 5 minutes, and the third one will have 3 minutes. And I'll just read our protocol for delegations. I would like to remind all delegations of some guidelines for participation. Please leave your video and camera turned off and your microphone audio muted until you are called upon to speak. Today's delegations will be allotted 5 minutes to speak, and I will provide a 1-minute warning reminder when your 5 minutes is nearing completion. We also ask that you leave the meeting once your issue has been addressed. You are then welcome to watch the remainder of the meeting being webcast live via YouTube. If you conduct yourself in any of the following manners, it will result in an immediate removal from the meeting: interrupting councillor, staff, or other delegations, derogatory statements about councillors, staff, or others, turning your camera on at inappropriate times, and hate speech or defamatory comments. And then we also have one delegation. We have 2 delegations that will have 5 minutes, and 1 delegation that registered after the deadline that will have 3 minutes, the third delegation. So we're going to deal with that item first. The delegations are all here on the information report in the regular agenda on the COVID-19 related temporary bike lanes, the final assessment. There's no staff presentation on this, so we'll go right to the delegations, and the first of those is David Trueman, Interim Chair of Cycle WR. David, you're with us. There you are.
I am indeed. I'll just share my screen. And put it into presentation mode. There we go.
There it is.
So thank you very much for allowing me the opportunity to speak to you today. I am, of course, speaking to the staff report, the final staff report on the temporary bike lanes. And I'm representing today as the interim chair, Cycle WR, which is a group of people advocating for cycling in the community, Waterloo region, to be a safe, respected, convenient, and everyday mode of transportation for people of all ages and abilities. And we're rather proud of the fact that just in the last couple of weeks, we were awarded by Share the Road, the Ontario organization of the year for our activities. So pretty proud of that. Um, advance the slide. There. So one of the first things I want to cover is the myth that the temporary bike lanes had a significant impact on traffic. There may have been isolated incidents, but this chart from TomTom, which measures congestion on our roads on an ongoing basis, shows that there was no significant systemic effect on traffic. You can see the little green circle on the timeline where the temporary bike lanes began, and the little red circle where they ended. And the line graph shows you the chart of average congestion over that period. And you can see that it gradually increased before the temporary bike lanes, roughly level after the bike lanes, a few odd days of congestion, presumably because of a major accident or a snowstorm. But basically no discernible impact to congestion in the region. On the other hand, there was significant positive impact of the temporary bike lanes. The staff report reports that the average increase in bicycle traffic was 41%. But in fact, if you look into the details, first of all, this was at a time when bicycle commuting was depressed just as car commuting was. I think we can assume that there was at least a 30% depression in commuters based on the depression in car traffic. And of course, the university students were largely absent, which is evident in the Bridgeport numbers. And if you look at in the preliminary report from October, some of the sites on Westmount, in fact, the numbers of cyclists were tripled during the time of the temporary bike lanes. So, a very significant impact. And of course, there's just an extremely positive reception from people on bicycles. I think you'll see that more vividly with presentation one of my colleagues, Josh Orita, later on. I would like to make the case that this was money well spent. The final bill, of course, was about $400,000 rather than the originally budgeted $550,000. And I would assert that the region would routinely spend this kind of money on consultant reports. And of course, when you get a consultant report, you get theoretical findings, which may or may not be true in practice, and you deliver no immediate tangible benefit to residents. Whereas this project, on the other hand, delivered real data, real findings, real learnings, and substantial benefit to thousands of residents. And this was, of course, during the pandemic, a time of real need by these residents. And I'll talk more about learnings later. So some of the learnings. Clearly, construction barrels are an unattractive form of temporary infrastructure. So
David, you're down to a minute now, David.
Okay. So treatment at intersections is crucial. One of the key things, I think, is that almost all opponents, even the most vocal, express support for permanent infrastructure. So let's hold them to their word going forward. I'm going to skip over this. So one of the outcomes was that we launched this Discover Your Superpower, encouraging active transportation to school. And in collaboration with Cycling into the Future, STSWR, and Climate Action, we had a virtual panel, we had a parking lot instruction session, and we offered a service of finding safe and age-appropriate routes to school. So some recommendations for next steps. We don't need to wait till 2022 to see new infrastructure. We should act on learnings right away. So my recommendations are extend the Herb Street pilot all the way to Margaret using the same materials as in the current section from Caroline to Pepler. Put a separate bike lane on Bridgeport using the same materials as on Herb. And on Westmount from Glasgow to Erb, pilot the 3-lane solution with the center turn lane using the same kind of materials as on Erb Street.
David, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up, please.
Okay, I think I'll leave this in front of you. I think there's some important food for thought here. The most important point being, 2/3 of Canadians working from home expect that arrangement is going to continue post-pandemic, which has a significant impact on traffic planning.
Okay, thank you, David. If you could make your slides available, we can distribute them to council. I do have a couple questions, or a couple members, I think, who want to ask you a question. Councillor Shantz.
Thank you. Thank you, David, for the presentation. I live in Elmira, so I don't have the opportunity to cycle in the city particularly, but I did talk to a few people who do cycle fairly extensively through the city, and they said that a lot of the trails provide really good connectivity through Kitchener and Waterloo. Given the option, because I like the idea of cycling trails, of having a network for cycling, but given the option, would you prefer a trail or a separated bike lane versus a lane that's an on-road lane?
So I think we have to address the 60% of the population who say they would like to cycle more but are reluctant because they feel unsafe. And for those people, I think the answer is fairly clear that trails are preferable. For dedicated cyclists such as myself, on-road is often preferable because it's faster. You don't have the conflict with pedestrians and so on. At the same time, though, we do have to, our major trails are overcrowded now, which is a wonderful success to have. But it means that the conflict between cyclists and pedestrians is greater. So having good on-road infrastructure means that, the faster, more confident cyclists can move onto the roads with safe infrastructure and, creating more room on those trails for pedestrians and those who are newer or feeling less confident on their bicycle.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Jaworski.
Thank you to David through the chair. Thank you very much for your report. I think that, as a cyclist who did use the lanes at some point, it was somewhat embarrassing but generous getting a full lane of traffic for safety. It was an incredible feeling of safety, even riding along some of our most traveled. However, also as a driver, and I think many drivers would agree, they look at the TomTom data with some skepticism, as that did not match what they felt while driving during with the COVID lanes near the construction barrels and that. Could you give us more details on what that data represents, or maybe clarify that a bit?
Yeah, it's the TomTom data is looking at congestion as a function of the delays. So you take the ideal trip duration, and then you look at how much it is extended during periods of congestion. So percent congestion is how much longer your trips take, and of course it is averaged across the entire community. But there were a few, just to show how sensitive that data is, there were a few days when there were bad accidents. Crashes, and that shows up as a little increase in the data. So it's not insensitive. I think we do have to compare objective data with subjective impressions. And obviously people, when there's change, people resist change and feel threatened by change. And I think some of the emotional reactions is a result of that. I also observed anecdotally both riding those lanes almost every day and from my car at times that sure, you might have 6 cars backed up at an intersection, but that's not congestion. I certainly will acknowledge there were times, the garbage trucks were an issue, obviously. So clearly a 2-lane solution on busy roads is not, permanent, but a 3-lane solution could work very well.
Thank you, David, for the clarification, and congratulations to the recognition for Cycle WR.
Thank you.
Councillor McGarry.
Thank you, through you, Chair. And thank you, David, for coming to today. And again, congratulations on the Share the Road recognition. We know that that's an agency across Ontario, so that's a significant award, and congratulations to you, members.
Thank you.
As you know, there was some significant pushback and on the Coronation bike lanes by a certain number in our population, which really essentially led to an early ending of the bike lane project. And yet there, if you compare Cambridge to Kitchener, for instance, some of the pushback was because the bike lanes were restricting some of the lanes in front of Cambridge Hospital, even though the LRT and just 1 lane each direction, it has been there for a couple of years, several years now, in front of Grand River Hospital in Kitchener. However, it was, I think, as you said, the perception rather than the reality of how vehicles can get around in those areas. You've answered my questions really about the garbage truck days. So I guess in essence, from the learnings from the Coronation bike lanes in Cambridge, what can you see our route would be in the future to try and determine a safe cycling route to connect the networks between the Preston area and the Galt area of Cambridge? Is there something that we can take forward to our own cycling master plan in Cambridge to have some wisdom about how to solve that problem?
Yeah. So, although I rode those lanes in Cambridge a number of times, and I do enjoy visits to Cambridge, which particularly I loved going down Westmount and down the Homer Watson Trail to spend some time in Cambridge through the summer. I'm not familiar enough with Cambridge to have any expertise. However, Tom Strickland, who has worked extensively with your active transportation manager, Lisa, and also has corresponded with the regional staff extensively on Cambridge, has lots of ideas, and he has shared those. I do think Coronation has a ton of room for permanent infrastructure, boulevard mutts. And even I would put forward, just as an idea, that center median, re-landscape it with active transportation lanes in the center. And I think it could be a beautiful result with nice shrubbery and so on. I think people could be really happy with that. So, I can't say that I have the immediate solution, but I think the solutions are out there, are the appropriate people to contribute to that thinking.
Thank you. And if I may, Mr. Chair, just to follow up, I did want to say too that I'm also a cyclist, and I was out many times on the Coronation bike lanes and was up and around the area around the Westmount lanes, and really at those particular times didn't see a lot of congestion. I know it happened a couple times and inconvenienced drivers, but I don't want to lose sight of the fact either that one of the most frequent complaint that we get as council members, both municipal and regional, is speeding and traffic issues with people not following the rules. And the outcome was that on some of these bike lanes that traffic was reduced, which is the outcome that many people want, but yes, maybe not necessarily to do with bike lanes. So, yeah. And that's my last question to you. Is there any, was there sort of a perceived issue around speeding, or did you notice as a cyclist that traffic was slower?
Yeah, definitely. Traffic was more in control. And I think that's reflected in at least the interim staff report covered that the maximum speeds were reduced. And And I think their finding was particularly on Westmount. We also had a report from a former resident on Westmount Road who said if these lanes had been in place when he lived there, he wouldn't have had to leave because his house had been hit 3 times by a speeding car out of control. And he finally moved away because he felt unsafe. So, anecdotal, but, an amazing story.
Councillor McGarry, I think maybe you can ask Mr. Vandekeur when he is up because the report does talk to an initiative in Cambridge to kind of identify that route that you're looking for. Councillor Verbanovic.
Thank you very much, Chair Galloway. And David, I too want to congratulate Cycle WR on your award. I think it speaks to the great leadership and work of people like you and so many others that have been part of this community group advocating for cycling in the community. I know there was, there were some points you wanted to make as part of your presentation, and time ran out. But I'm just wondering, maybe I will focus it on the context of, if we had to do this again from a cycling point of view, what from your perspective do you think maybe we could have done differently?
I do think that, some other communities used better solutions for their temporary installations. And frankly, I don't blame staff at all for this because I thought construction barrels would be fine too. But clearly they produce an emotional reaction more so than some more subtle treatments. So, in Toronto, they use much smaller temporary bollards that still were orange and black, but, didn't have that big, construction feeling. Clearly, getting in front of it faster, I think there are, the region should consider, under emergency situations, how can outreach and consultation be accelerated? So you're still doing the consultation, but it is in an accelerated way. And there was some discussion of that at the Ontario Bike Summit, because of course other municipalities did similar things, right? And they had some similar findings. I think
when you reference that, you mean things like maybe hand delivering letters to homeowners along that stretch, things like that?
Yeah, maybe a bit of paid media, maybe getting out in front with the media. Maybe that could have been helpful. And in terms of some, I think most of these installations were pretty successful. But obviously Cambridge was more controversial. And I think one of the key things too is when you're going to do something controversial, you have to be prepared in advance for the fallout. So how are you going to handle the media? How are you going to handle social media? How are you going to be responding to misinformation? How are you going to get ahead of the narrative that's out? Because clearly the narrative got out of control in Cambridge. And perhaps if we had collectively been more proactive about the messaging, we might have been able to forestall that. And then the one other thing, there was an observation from Toronto at the Ontario Bike Summit, is they said some of our projects deserved greater consultation and we shouldn't have rushed into them. So there was discussion about, can we establish criteria for when we can move quickly on projects and when we need to take our time with greater due diligence? Possibly Coronation is one of those where maybe the criteria would have said, hey, there's a hospital here, this is going to be high sensitivities, maybe we should take more time on this or consider another route. And then the one last thing, I don't want to take too much time here, is I do think, I totally applaud staff on this initiative, that they were bold and fast moving. But I think they could have been, in hindsight, better prepared to be responsive to the situations as they arose. So, we provided feedback on suggestions for improvements on coronation, and there were clearly some need for some improvements on Bridgeport. And I think if they could have been more responsive to those things, then we might have had a better result as well. And it's mainly about treatment at intersections, right? That where there was, where you reduce things too much, there's just going to be congestion problems at the intersection.
Thanks, David. I think those are some great insights, and it's always a challenge in times like this. I think there'll be many learnings as we look back on the pandemic and look at various parts of the response, which I think generally as a community has been very very positive and high level, and certainly that's what I hear from residents. But you're right. I mean, things like raised anxiety levels, impact how people react to change sometimes. And so how do we balance that in with the opportunity to make change? Communication is key. And I think we learned that on a variety of fronts. Because when people are outside more, aesthetics is important. So yeah, maybe the size of the bollard becomes an issue as a result of that. So I think those are some excellent insights. Thank you again. And thanks for really encouraging us to pursue this.
Thank you.
Councillor Rentz.
I'm getting there. Hi, thanks, David. Thanks for coming in. So I have a couple of questions for you, and I appreciate the comments that you made. Hindsight is 20/20, but I think it's important that if we're going to impact homeowners, they should have at least the courtesy to understand and know what's going on. So when we made the decision to put barrels the night of our meeting from Queen Street to Block Line Road without any of the residents along that section, it's all front lotted to all the way to the expressway bridge. Do you think that was a fair move to wake up in the morning and see traffic barrels in front of your house and no idea what's going on?
Well, in fact, the time between the decision and the installation was actually close to a month. So, there was lots of time for communication there.
Right, but there wasn't communication. That's the problem.
Right. Yeah. So yes, I think as I've already observed, better communications would clearly have led to a smoother reception. I'm not saying it would have solved all the problems and reactions, but I think it would have helped.
Yeah, I think at least informing residents, especially along that area, would have gone a long way. I know other municipalities, when they look at doing these things, they try to encourage residents and also citizens to and bring the whole idea along so people have some buy-in and they understand when it's going to start, when it's going to stop, what the rationale is for it, and any concerns they have, this is how you raise them, and we'll try to identify them. We didn't really do any of that. So some people say it's a big success. I say it was a big failure that came out of the pandemic committee, and I was quite surprised that we were making knee-jerk decisions the evening of that. But anyway, that's my other question is cycling in the rural areas. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people I know cycle from the urban areas out to the rural areas, and you do that. You say you do a lot of cycling.
I do.
Yeah. What about do people bike out with their vehicles, like take them out into rural areas and then park somewhere? And I guess I'm worried about the safety concerns of driving on some of the regional roads to get to some of those rural areas. Have you ever been concerned about that?
When you're cycling on the roads, safety is always a concern. But the benefits far outweigh the safety concerns actually, objectively, rationally. Right. But I'm not other than like mountain bikers certainly sometimes drive and then ride. But most recreational road cyclists ride all the way. There isn't very much, I don't think, driving and parking with their bikes.
So do you think there's an opportunity for us to do tests like this in some of the settlement areas in the 4 townships? Have you looked at anything like that, your group?
For sure. Our focus is primarily urban, simply because that's where the numbers, the demand is there. But I do think especially the more settled areas, do deserve better treatment in terms of active transportation. And I also think we shouldn't be leaving it up to those rural communities to finance it all, because in many cases it's the urban residents that are benefiting from the rural infrastructure. So I think the region should have should help to subsidize the active transportation facilities in the rural areas.
I would agree with you, especially on regional roads. And
yeah.
I just looked at how enthusiastic all the mayors were from the townships in supporting this whole initiative that happened last year, that maybe we could do some tests out there as well.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, thank you for coming in. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Councillor Erb.
Thanks, David, for your presentation, and as well, congratulations on the award. I'm wondering, one of the problems seemed to be at elections, and I know regional staff did respond to that after a couple of calls. I'm wondering if you have any observations or comments on how, do you think it was a function of the way we created the barriers with the barrels as opposed to a permanent design?
Certainly, the flexibilities with the barrels and the clarity of what you're supposed to do with the barrels was limited. You can definitely do much better with permanent. Some of the intersections I thought were rather well done. For example, at Westmount and University, there was that painted green exchange area where it was fairly clear that the bicycles stayed in the green, and at that point the cars could cross the green with caution because they'd be looking out for bicycles. So I thought that was rather good. There were some areas though where there was a right turn lane for traffic that seemed to be completely blocked by barrels, and that if they had done the same thing as at University, I think it would have been more satisfactory for both cyclists and for cars, because cars just didn't know what to do at those points.
Yeah.
And then one other intersection that was just, I thought could have been very much improved was Bridgeport at King, where there was a dedicated right turn lane and only one lane of through traffic. And that was a huge bottleneck. And if they had turned the right turn lane into straight ahead as well, and then put some guidance lines to direct the direction of traffic across the intersection to the 2 lanes on the other side of King, then I think we wouldn't have had that bottleneck there at all, and it wouldn't have impacted the bicycles at all.
Thank you. And it was a pilot project. It's part of the learning experience and the lessons we learn. And hopefully when this is duplicated again, we will do it better in some respects. Just a quick response to Councillor Jeff inquiry about out into the rural townships. I bike out into Wellesley Town quite often, and to Wilmot, or to Woolwich to a lesser degree, and I think the townships have done an excellent job in marking the roads out towards Bamberg and areas with bicycling lanes that, as you say, it's always you're never sure when you're on a road with speeding vehicles, but I think they've done a commendable job in creating bicycling lanes in the township, and they're used particularly on summer evenings and on the weekends. They're well used.
Yeah, I'm on them all the time.
Well, I hope we don't bump into one another.
Okay, that's the last Councillor David. Thanks very much for your presentation. I'll now ask Leslie Maxwell to join us. There she is. Welcome, Leslie. Leslie's the School Travel Planning Supervisor for the Student Transportation Services of Waterloo Region. That is for both school boards, in case you didn't know.
Thank you so much. And thank you for this opportunity to speak this morning. I'm going to ready my presentation, if you don't mind, if you'll bear with me just for a moment. And I want to start that from the beginning. Please let me know if you can see it.
Yes, we can, Leslie.
Fantastic. So as Chair just told you, I work with Student Transportation Services of Waterloo Region. I've worked with some of you a little more closely than others. I work on a team of 3, and we focus on making active school travel an easier choice for families in our region. This morning, I want to share with you some of the results of a survey that we ran with schools that are on or near the regional temporary bike lanes. We ran this survey last September and this past September, October, to find out more about how families were responding to the temporary lanes. I'll preface first by sharing with you that most of our responses came from families with children in the elementary grades, with the bulk of those being aged 6 to 10 years old. We asked families if they had used the bike lanes or these specific bike lanes ever, and in their short duration, I guess. And 38.6% of our respondents had used them, while 61.4% had not. We noticed a difference in the way these two groups of people answered our questions regarding comfort on the lanes, the school commute, and potential mode shift. So their choice to walk or cycle rather than drive. And on the idea of whether parents themselves were more comfortable cycling due to the lanes, those who had used the lanes, of course, said the lanes made them either somewhat more comfortable or more comfortable cycling in those areas. And those who had never used the lanes said that their comfort level was the same or even less. Their perception was completely different. We also asked parents if they plan to use the lanes on their school commute. And many of those who had used them in the past or had already used them indicated that they would use them to walk or cycle or both to school. And the parents who had not used them yet mostly said that they did not plan to use the lanes as part of their child's commute to school. Finally, those parents who had used the lanes had also said that they thought that the lanes would increase the capacity for active school travel in their community, while those who had never used the lanes thought they wouldn't have any impact whatsoever. From these 3 questions, we can see that whether families had used the lanes or not used the lanes significantly changed their attitudes towards the lanes. I believe with a longer implementation time and more permanent infrastructure, there will be more opportunity for these families to try protected lanes in the first place. And we believe more families will become more comfortable, and this could lead to a greater mode shift in choice, a greater shift in mode choice for the school commute. And that could really impact traffic, because we know that 25% of the morning commute is attributable to the school commute. We also asked an open question about whether parents felt more comfortable having their children walk or bike to school on their own as a result of these lanes. Of those who answered with a direct and identifiably direct yes or no answer, 22 people said yes and 13 said no. I wanted to share some of their comments here because their words really brought their experience to life for us.
Leslie,
I won't read them. Yes.
Leslie, you're down to a minute. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I won't read them because I don't have time, but I want to point out that many of the no comments focused on the confusion or impatience of drivers and the impact to traffic. while many of the yes comments focused on feelings of safety. And some of these mentioned that there are paths that they wouldn't otherwise travel with their children. Brad Hughes from Forest Hill Public School on Westmount Road couldn't be here today, but I spoke with him yesterday. Brad had shared some of his misgivings with you about the lane in front of his school with many, and he pled for the lanes to be removed before school reopened in September. The lanes remained in place, and he's really glad that they did. He told me yesterday that the things that he was afraid of never came to pass. He said that speeds were visibly reduced, traffic volume was still up, but drivers did not act hostilely or impatiently in his experience. He spoke to the crossing guard, and she did not find it more difficult to perform her duties, and in fact found it easier to cross children across only 2 live lanes of traffic rather than 4. And bus drivers managed their turns very easily after a quick adjustment to the barrels by regional staff to accommodate their turning radii. He said that although few children cycled to school still, the lanes were a very observable buffer for children who walked. From his vantage point at the school, Brad also saw many community members cycling the lanes throughout the day. He saw no increased stress in the parents that he served, and he asked me to tell you that he'd like to help in any way you need him to, if you make and when you make these lanes permanent. The inferences we drew from our survey did not necessarily surprise us, but I want to point
If
out
you could
number
wrap
4.
up, Leslie, thank you.
Yep. Sorry, can I
If
just
you could
wrap up?
Quickly.
Okay, thank you. This was it. I just wanted to point out number 4. It's important to me because I've never seen a single intervention on its own convince parents to consider their shift from walking with their children to letting them do it on their own. And then I'd also like to draw your attention to number 5 here, because it leads me to an offer. My team is skilled. We're ready to help in the areas of education and encouragement through our schools, should you choose to create any permanent lanes. Our children deserve the chance to move around their city independently as their maturity grows. Thanks for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thanks, Leslie. Chair Redmond.
My question was actually for the last delegation. I'll save it for staff.
Okay. Councillor McGarry.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation this morning. I've been quite interested in active and safe routes to school for children. And I'm quite interested in the statistics that came out of the survey and some of the sort of suggestions that you have moving ahead. And I guess the question is, we all know the benefits of children having more exercise at school and having more opportunities for daily activity, which is built into sort of long-term thinking in those children for lifelong exercise. But I guess my question is that there's a lot of people that think that that this is a good idea, but in reality, they may not actually take advantage of actually doing it. So with that disconnect between people thinking it's a good idea and actually using the lanes, what's the most significant thing that we as municipalities can do to encourage active and safe transportation to school and cycling?
It's a multi-pronged answer, really. School travel planning works with school communities to devise those barriers. What is stopping parents from actually choosing to use active travel to school? But we work with the families to find out what those barriers are, and then we address them. And it's always more than one thing. So in a lot of cases, and in this one in particular, I think it's a matter of providing opportunities, safe and attractive opportunities for people to try the infrastructure, and to become more familiar and comfortable using it themselves, and then using it with their children. If you don't cycle yourself, you're not going to throw your kids into a bike lane that you've never used. So we work often with celebration days, bringing people and encouraging full families or the whole school to come out and walk to school on a given day. We're just really starting to get more into working with cycling as well. So having a cycling to school day in the spring could help. But we also would support cycling into the future lessons at the school, and family bike rides run from the school if we were to focus on cycling at a given school. So we have probably about I would say 50 to 75 different interventions that we have used at different schools, depending upon what families and parents have identified as the barriers to their choice, and to also read into and tease out those things that they can't even identify themselves. So we work with the 5 E's, from education and encouragement to evaluation, enforcement, and engineering to help make the choice easier. But certainly a lot of communication, a lot of encouragement, and opportunities to make them more familiar with the roads and with the infrastructure that they'll be using is very much key.
Okay, I don't have any other questions, Lizzie. Thank you very much. I do want to thank you also specifically for dealing with or working with Mr. Hughes at Forest Hill Public School. He was quite concerned initially, and then you kind of interceded and brought him around, and now he's an advocate. So that's certainly a success story in terms of the project as well, and all part of the learnings that the pilot project has provided for us. So thanks again, Leslie, for your participation here today. The next delegation is Josh Orita. Josh, are you with us?
Hi.
There's Josh. Yeah, and Josh, you registered late. I think you're aware you have 3 minutes.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you for this opportunity to speak. I'm Josh Orita, and I'm here to speak about the temporary bike lanes, which are on today's agenda. The pandemic has made life difficult for everyone and pushing many people to spend more time outdoors. The project delivered real value to residents at a time of need and helped us to envision a better future. I wanted to document how the temporary bike lanes made people feel. So I posted on social media and to find volunteers who would let me film them. In the end, I was able to make 4 videos. These are, none of them are hardcore cyclists or exclusively bike everywhere. They choose to bike when they can for reasons like convenience, saving money, health, and more. And my videos were on YouTube and Twitter, and they resonated a lot with locals as well as people who lived outside Waterloo region and appreciated bike lanes since they lived somewhere that didn't have any. Just like those cities didn't give them any space. And I'd just like to share one of the videos, and it's just 2 minutes, and it will be my presentation.
We live in Waterloo region and we use our bikes a lot to get around, but we also have a car and we walk places too. We started off riding bikes because we wanted to save money and put ourselves into a position where we didn't need to have 2 cars in our family. We keep doing it because our days are always better. I know when I'm out with the kids by myself, even if it's stressful getting out of the house, the day is better when we are on bikes.
I ride my bike primarily to work pretty much every day.
I bike to programming with the kids. We go visit family and friends. Well, especially not in pandemics, but we have 3 kids and 2 of them are now biking independently. Sometimes it's really tricky when we're dealing with a lot of traffic and drivers passing really closely. That's, I think, our biggest challenge. The temporary bike lanes have been really helpful in making us feel safer. Having to not merge in and out of driving lanes really makes a big difference. Like, we used to bike for utilitarian purposes, more biking to classes and to programming and to swimming lessons. But now we bike to pick up online grocery orders, and we go for family bike rides, which is something we didn't really have that much time to do before. It's given us more safe spaces to ride.
I would just like to say thank you to councillors for implementing the temporary bike lanes for health reasons during the pandemic time. I mean, a lot of people have, they were kind of stuck at home, and this is a way to get a little bit of exercise for sure.
It's been so great to be acknowledged as a road user who needs a little bit of a different type of attention than somebody in a car.
That's everything. Thank you. If you want to see the full videos, my website's there and they're all listed.
Okay, thanks very much, Josh. That was great. I've seen some of those on Twitter, of course. So, Councillor Jaworski.
I just wanted to echo the chair's remarks there, Josh. Your work is exceptional, and to say somebody is going to take the time to endorse a municipal government's initiative is truly great. To see Kate and her husband there biking along with their families, and also highlighting our beautiful refurbished artwork, Aporia, at the old courthouse. I thought that was great, as well as Elizabeth and I serve on the Public Art Advisory Committee, making that investment as well. So thank you for that, and also the highlighting of the great Spurline Trail there, another investment by the region with local municipalities and Metrolinx. It shows off the community so well, and I just want to, on behalf of all of us, thank you for supporting your municipality.
Thanks.
Councillor McGarry.
Thank you, through you, Chair. And Josh, I would echo Councillor Jaworski's comments. And I also wanted to say a picture is worth 1,000 words. So a video is worth 1,000,000 words. I just had a quick question regarding younger children cycling in bike lanes. As I've said before, I'm very interested in active and safe routes to school in particular. You've created the video and have seen some of the comments around it, I'm sure. So I'm just wondering, do you think that a video like this would be helpful for families who are a little bit reluctant to try some of the cycling infrastructure to get their kids to school? Would this help perhaps spur them on to at least trying it?
I'm not a parent, but I believe so. I made 4 videos, and I kind of didn't want to make them all just about the temporary bike lanes. I try to show off what's in Waterloo region and just how people ride. So I kind of try and make them a little generic, I guess you could say, so that in the future we can look back on them and people can reference them for motivation, I guess, and also just to see what we've done with the temporary lanes during the pandemic.
Okay, no other questions, Josh. Thanks again for joining us this morning and going to that effort. I'll turn to the report now, starting on page 57. There is no staff presentation. It is here for information. There's been a lot of discussion and comment already, but if anybody has questions of Mr. Vandekeer, we can certainly ask those now. Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair Galloway. I thought the presentations today were very interesting, and I think everybody's trying to pull on the same rope, but we seem to be going in different directions. I mean, I support active transportation as well. I've been one of the founding members of our active transportation committee at the region, and I sit there now with Councillor Kiefer. My question, I guess, Steve, is those people we saw on that last video probably aren't riding today, and they probably won't ride again till April or May. And I think that's kind of conducive of what you do when the weather's bad. I mean, you don't encourage your kids to go out and ride in a snowstorm. And I think that's the problem that I have, and I think other people as well, is how do we put bike lanes in that are used maybe 6 or 7 months of the year, and then the rest of the time they basically sit empty, and people drive by and say, why are those things here? There's nobody in it, nobody's using it. Is the solution to move forward with temporary that we put in the spring and take out in the fall? Or, for example, I drove up Queen Street this morning, and I saw a guy riding beside the bike lane on the sidewalk, looked like he was going to school. Nobody else in those bike lanes at all. And I think that's what kind of ticks people off, is they're there and nobody uses them, especially in weather like this, when it's cold or it's snowing or they haven't been cleared, that kind of stuff. So has your team given any thought to how we get around that?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, our team's given quite a lot of thought to that. What we're looking at trying to do here is to create a shift in culture, not just for cyclists, but also for drivers. And that's not something that can happen overnight. It's going to take possibly generations, as it has occurred in other cities in other parts of the world. And even in Canada, there are cities such as Montreal where they get a pretty healthy amount of cyclists using cycling lanes in the winter. And Montreal gets, one could argue, pretty serious winters compared to what we get here in KW with more snow. And when surveyed, cyclists generally said that they would continue to cycle in the winter despite the cold, as long as there was adequate facilities that made them feel safe and they were maintained properly. So yes, cycling in the winter is a big challenge, and those habits won't change overnight. But as an example, there are schools in Norway where 80% of the kids bike to the school all year. And the average temperatures in some of these towns are -10, -15, all through January, February, and they have an 80% cycling rate to those schools. Now, of course, that culture didn't happen overnight. It took generations. So what we're trying to do is to provide facilities to nudge and encourage people to try something. And over time, I think the ridership will come.
Okay, that's an interesting perspective. Thank you.
Chair Redmond?
Thank you, Chair Galloway. One of the things that came to mind with the first delegation actually was the need for consistent signage. And I know that that's been something the cycling community have talked about. The transition from urban to rural sometimes has different markings. And I'm just wondering if Mr. Van de Keer can talk about the cooperation and how we're moving forward with making signage consistent. And I also want to thank you and staff, Steve, for making a much clearer kind of accounting of the ridership. I found this report very interesting, and I know that this is a pilot project and we all will go forward with learnings, but specifically my question is around the signage, both signs as well as the street markings.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Chair Redmond. Yeah, we're working with our counterparts at the air municipalities to achieve consistency in the way facilities are marked and signed. One of the challenges we have is we have many different types of facilities here in the region. As the cycling facilities have been evolving over time, and we started out with on-road bike lanes years ago. And then we moved to more multi-use trails. And then we've also been implementing segregated cycling lanes. And now we're looking at fully separated cycling lanes. And we're looking at things like protected intersections. So it is a challenge to keep up with what's new and upcoming, and do work with our area municipality counterparts. We learn and help each other in terms of what's coming. And we'll continue to strive to have greater consistency in how facilities are marked and signed.
So if I just a supplemental, so basically you're saying that on a go-forward basis, consistency is possible. It's going back and changing all the signage that already exists as part of the problem?
Well, through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, that would be a significant challenge because we have a lot of existing infrastructure out there. But over time, as new projects come online and existing facilities get turned into new facilities, those signs will be converted. I mean, if there are specific locations or problems, we can always address them as they come up. But it may be fairly large project to go back and retrofit all signs and markings that have been previously installed. But again, if there are specific situations that have been brought to our attention, we can take a look at those and see if we can make them clear.
Thank you.
Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Question for staff. The staff that actually concerned me the most was the GRT increases in delays of up to 7.5% during peak periods. I think I'm more sensitive to transit delays because of the necessity to make transfers in many cases, so it's a compounding effect. Do you think that the addition of things like center turning lanes will take care of that? To what extent do you think center turning lanes would take care of that?
Thomas, you want to take that, Mr. Schmidt?
Yeah, and through you, Mr. Chair, and possibly Peter Zink as well. I think part of what we've learned is some of the impacts on transit. There's probably different solutions in different spots. So I don't think it's a one size fits all. I think even in the report itself, you can see that each of the pilots that we tried was a little bit different from the second one, depending on the road, depending on the traffic, depending on the neighborhood. So I think from a transit perspective, a lot of learnings. And yes, we would look at, in any more permanent design, try to find ways to better accommodate transit. And as well, not just transit, we also had some with our waste collection. So I think waste collection is also something that needs to have some more thought put into it and how that is done to make sure it's done effectively and safely. But maybe Mr. Zink has an additional comment.
Just to add on a couple thoughts, certainly single lane operation is going to slow transit down a little bit. We work with Steve's team to try out different solutions for bus stops. So bus stops that are in kind of bus bays around the barriers and bus stops that are in the traveled portion to maintain speeds. There's complications with some of those. There's additional study that has to go on with that. Sometimes there are pedestrian issues that are caused by crossing the cycling lane. So those are all sort of in that category of, things we learned in this, and additional efforts are needed on that to maintain transit speeds as best they can in a single lane operation where these barrels are in place providing a cycling lane.
Thank you.
Councillor McGarry.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair, I did want to commend staff for a really thorough report after the temporary bike lane project. And I was very interested in sort of what are the next steps, as I've said before, in Cambridge. As we know, cycling has so many benefits to residents, and that includes the tourism sector. As we've heard in years gone by, that one of the fastest growing sectors in the tourism economy in the province of Ontario are cycling enthusiasts. And I'm certainly keen to assist in what we can do in Cambridge to complete some of the networks. And of course, that brings me back to a question that Mr. Chair suggested that I ask at this time. And that was really about what future plans are there. I see that there's a mini study to sort of find a better solution or a solution between the sections in Creston and the downtown Cambridge or Galt area. And I note that city staff in Cambridge will be part of this, but I'm just wondering if there's any more details that you could provide me with now, and if it's too early to do that, will be using some of the findings or some of the wisdom from our Trails Advisory Committee here in Cambridge?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we welcome input from all groups, particularly the Trails Committee in Cambridge and as well city staff. What this pilot project told us is there's definitely a demand for cycling between Preston and Galt. That was evidenced by the increase in cycling use along Coronation. So this mini study that we hope to launch this year will look at some options in conjunction with working with city staff. One of those options could be to modify the cross-section of Coronation in order to provide a cycling facility or a multi-use trail in the boulevard. But there may be other routes that we can look at. There's definitely some challenges getting through some of the tight areas of Galt, and staff are also going to be looking at ways that we can try and make cycling through those areas more comfortable for cyclists, including looking at options and feasibility for limiting trucks through Galt, which may also help to encourage more cycling through that area. So yeah, these things are all going to be either started or are in the works right now. But I don't have any details on that mini study, but I can certainly provide an update when more information is available.
Thank you very much. Appreciated.
Councillor Shantz.
Thank you. I'd just like to tag on to Chair Redmond's comments about signage. And I know Mr. Vandekeer said he's working with various groups, so I'm assuming he's also working with the trails groups. The G2G Trail has spent some time having consistent signage all along there with the various sub-trails that go along. So just to put a pitch in to make sure you include some of those trail groups when you're looking at consistent signage and how you can work together with them.
Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Chair Galloway. Just a quick question for staff, for those that may be watching or listening or picking up this YouTube committee at a later date. So we've got the COVID pilot project or temporary bike lane project in lieu of COVID is one project. And then we've got the other more permanent / temporary pilot project happening with cycling lanes in the region. When will that particular one, come back to council for evaluation with the data? When can we expect to see that? Or how long does that pilot run for, just so people know?
For you, Mr. Chair, the separated cycling lanes pilot was planned for 18 months of duration. It was put in place, I would say, about fall of 2019. Unfortunately, with the onset of the pandemic, usage in the university area was not as high as what was hoped, but we still did get good usage. The project team has been meeting to look at the data, and we hope to put together an update report for committee in the spring of 21.
Okay, so spring of 21, we'll have an idea of how the results were for the separated cycling lanes. That's good. I think that there's a lot of folks looking to see the data for that. Look, I think, and again, I thank staff for their work here. The presenters that presented, I've watched the videos online. As a guy that has 3 kids who love to cycle as well, it was nice seeing some of those videos. However, I think, the reality here was, construction pylons, when we see them, we fear the worst, and the fact that, we've got construction ahead and there was all of that, but the significant cost to do this in a temporary basis, I think I hear time and again that, taxpayers, when again, they were deferring their property taxes, we were hiring more critical staff, we were laying off staff, in fact, at the region, was something that taxpayers felt was not a good use of their money. And we'll bring that up again, as an issue that allowed me to vote against this in the first place. I want to see more active transportation. There's no doubt about that. But I look at those new projects that the region's doing along Homer Watson, where we've got, a parallel paved path for, whether it be cyclists, rollerblading, running. I mean, those are the pieces of infrastructure that I would absolutely support day in and day out for the region to continue to do. I get that it's not plausible to do it all at once. But I know as we expand and do reconstruction of our regional roads, that is an ideal piece of infrastructure that I will support day and night. I still have an issue with what we did with those segregated bike lanes. I don't usage justified the cost. And I believe again that the regional roads are meant to transport higher volumes of traffic, especially commercial traffic. And when you mix the two on regional roads, you know, and I know the presenter said that the stats perhaps aren't there, but I just see, you know, that investment happening more on municipal roads or lower tier roads. That's really where I think we should focus and perhaps support those communities to do that. So I'll look forward to seeing the segregated bike lane report. I mean, we all know the cost to do that is extensive as well in terms of snow clearing and the limited amount of people using those to justify the cost. And so I'll be looking for that report, those numbers, and I guess I'll just leave it at that. Those are my comments. And I'm sure I'll get a few emails now after what I just said from some of the cycling community, and I encourage you to do that and send those emails. There's nothing more than what we want is safe cycling, but to have done it on regional roads this summer, the cost simply just didn't justify the expense.
Councillor Kiefer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And for the sake of time, I'm not going to repeat everything Councillor Harris said, but I am following the same thought line as he has just extended. Having said that, I think you know, this is an educational process, as was pointed out by Mr. Vanderkeer, and it'll take time, and I believe that too. And there were lessons learned, and yes, probably at the cost of not doing something in the right way, or in the cost of costing the taxpayers money, as Councillor Harris pointed out. So I'm thinking that when we do these temporary or even permanent infrastructure things, I think one of the lessons we've learned that we need to have more time and thought put into them, to you know, in particular on pilot projects. And I think the fact that there's so many variables that have been mentioned in terms of, you know, different locations, different situations, different municipalities. I think all that plays into the context of this. I too, like everybody else, would like to see safe cycling and encourage cycling. But as I have stated publicly before, I don't believe that, you know, you can have a situation on all streets where you can have cycling. There are some locations, believe it or not, and probably others will disagree, that, you know, you just shouldn't have cycling, and for safety reasons, you shouldn't have them. So, and I'll probably get letters and emails about that, but that's fine. I encourage that too. As far as looking at you know, in the future, in terms of looking at different cycle lanes, it was mentioned, you know, the Preston Galt area, but I'm also going to bring up Hespeler for the fact that you know, there's a lot of cyclists in the Hespeler side of Cambridge as well. So I would encourage staff to also look at that situation, at that particular geographic area too. So, but like I said earlier, I think this is an educational process. I want to thank staff for, of course, delving into this and working hard and bringing back results. And I look forward to seeing what results come in down the road and what plans we have for down the road. So thank you very much.
Councillor Jowett.
Thank you, Chair Galloway, and thanks, Carl. Absolutely, I had written down here, Hespeler is a fast-growing community. Don't leave us out because we're just sitting in that little corner of the 401. We want to be part of an active transportation plan throughout the region. If we're going to be included in active transportation, I think all parts have to be, and I don't think anyone's intentionally forgetting about us for sure. I appreciate the really open and honest analysis of this particular pilot project. We wrestle with rolling something out too quickly or not quickly enough, and we could hear both sides of that. I also am concerned about the weather in our community and how it rolls out. So I was wondering, everybody's familiar with those on the regional roads, those poles that appear when the snow appears, and I don't know if that's a a consideration. I really don't know what happened with the barrels, but they did prove to be problematic. So I'd like to explore what other people are doing in that regard. And I actually think that maybe this is a unique approach, but instead of assuming that we need to be on regional roads, perhaps it's time to down some of that pilot project money or support to our second tiers in order that we may strategize for what's best for the community rather than, hung up on its regional funds. So we're going to put them on regional roads. So just another way of kind of changing the conversation a little bit more strategically, I think, is all I wanted to add to that. So thanks.
Okay, I have no other speakers, but I did want to chat. And just to Councillor Jowett's last point, I do want to point out that the region is paying for the bike lanes on Columbia Street and Phillip Street in Waterloo, which are city streets. We agreed to do that, so we've already set that precedent where the region is collaborating with local municipalities, including funding some of these projects. I think that the temporary bike lane project has been quite successful for the objectives that we set for it. The two objectives that we set for it were to try to alleviate some of the congestion on some of the major trail systems in our community. The Iron Horse Trail as an example. I think it was successful in doing that. I think that the other objective was to learn how or to learn what some of the impacts would be on some of our very busy roads. And we have learned that there are some impacts, of course, and we would not build bike lanes on these roads the way that we did the temporary bike lanes. That was a quick and dirty way. You had to take a full lane in order to do anything at all. The 3-lane cross-section, I think, from my point of view, seems to be a possibility if we want to proceed in some particular manner with built infrastructure for active transportation on our roads, so that the 3rd lane, of course, people can get around garbage trucks, buses, and so on, and also not have the delays at minor intersections where there aren't signalized controls. I think we wanted to move the needle a little bit. We wanted to, and I think we've done that. And I think we made some mistakes. I agree with Councillor Lawrence as far as the communication process. It was a quick and dirty communication process that I think has proven not to have been the best, although the timing was such that I'm not sure what else we could have done. But when you don't go through a proper communication process, then you do get the pushback that we saw, and we may have been able to avoid to some extent had we had a more fulsome communication process like we normally do. But at the end of the day, I think it has been successful. That we've learned, we've had some good lessons in terms of what the future might hold. I think we've advanced the whole notion of active transportation to some extent, and with the City of Kitchener yesterday approving its downtown cycling routes, another piece of the puzzle, so to speak, that the community is going to see and get to experience and benefit from. So I think it's a long journey, as Mr. Vandekeer had indicated. It'll be a few generations. Winter cycling, I think Councillor Rentz brings up a good point. However, I would correct him that family does winter cycle all year. So I'm sure they only do it on good days, not snowy, icy days, but they are a 12-month-a-year cycling family. Although I'm sure they reduce their activity as many cyclists do during the wintertime. Not everybody puts on studded tires and does some of the things that Mr. Trueman does to be able to cycle 12 months a year. So I want to thank staff as well for the report with all the various information. We all got a lot of communication, and some of it was quite warranted. But the numbers kind of speak for themselves in terms of reduced speeds. The amount of congestion was not significant on average, but certainly significant at certain times of the day and in certain locations, particularly Bridgeport Road. So a lot of learnings, and as I said at the beginning, we would not build permanent infrastructure the way this was done, because it was just a pilot. So we'll leave it at that. We have, I think, a kind of a renewed emphasis on active transportation in our strategic plan, amongst other things. And of course, the pandemic is front and center on all things strategic at the moment. But we have some new staff in engineering that are really quite experienced, and we're looking forward to working with some of the new staff on active transportation as we push forward on that strategic objective that the region has. And of course, we'll be doing that in collaboration with all the local municipalities as well. Okay, so we'll return to the consent agenda. Is there anything on the consent agenda anybody would like to extract, talk to about? Councillor Clark.
I did just have one question about the change in the CTC report. Should I ask it now, or do you want to take it out?
Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Clark.
Sure. Just the reference to the HAWS, I just want some clarity around the statement that 56% of households receiving rent assistance. What does that? That doesn't mean that 56% of the people living in the CTC receive it. Does it mean that 56% of our total HAWS recipients live in the Central Transit Corridor? I didn't quite understand the reference to HAWS there.
Okay, Mr. Rogier or Michelle?
I would direct that question to Michelle or Margaret Parkin if she happens to be on the call.
Through the chair, what it's referring to is the number of recipients on that program within the CTC corridor, and that number has remained consistent in the last few years. So they've continued to be able to find affordable housing subject to that program within the CTC.
Okay, thank you very much.
On that same report, Ms. Sergi, it indicated that, people talk about the gentrification issue associated with the corridor. Is that finding actually telling us that it's not an issue? Or am I kind of misinterpreting that?
Through the chair, we do continue to monitor affordability throughout the CTC monitoring report. I think the challenge is that affordability is a concern across the region. So the numbers that you're seeing reflected in the report indicate that while affordability is an increasing concern within the CTC, it's not as pronounced as it is outside the CTC and throughout the region as a whole.
Okay, I guess, so where it says on page 9 that affordability is 30% in the CTC, but only 15% across the region, is that the average of all areas across the region, or is that only the areas outside of the CTC that averages 15%, or do you know?
It's across the entire region.
Across the entire region.
CTC.
So there's double the affordability in the CTC versus the region as a whole.
That's correct.
And do we know if affordability, even though it's double along the CTC, has actually been reduced? Like, for instance, what did it used to be triple as opposed to double?
So over the years, we have seen a decrease in affordability in the CTC, as we've seen across the entire region as a whole. So it is continuing to be a concern and increasing as a concern across the entire region. I think one of the reasons for the difference between the CTC and the region as a whole is the types of units that you'll find within the CTC versus the greenfield areas. We're not exactly comparing apples and oranges. You have smaller units within the CTC, and you have single detached dwellings in the greenfield areas, and so that difference factors into the affordability numbers.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Councillor Clark, you're not, okay. All right, thanks very much for that. I have no further questions on the consent agenda, so it's moved by Councillor Urbanovic, seconded by Councillor Clark. If you would use your icons to vote for the consent agenda. And I've got a couple of hands there, Councillor Clark and Councillor Harris. Is that a yes or a hand up? Okay. All right. I did that once too. Well, maybe twice. That's carried. Thank you. We'll go to the regular agenda now. And there are no presentations. So all the reports, as I understand it, and maybe I'm wrong on that, but we'll go through them, I think are questions and answers. So the first one is on public display of hate symbols on page 44. Anyone have any questions to staff in that regard? There's a recommendation there. Oh, Councillor Jowett.
Thank you, Chair Galloway. And although I see the terrible result of hate symbols and the victimization of it, where I run into some concern is that there are some symbols that are culturally mean something different to somebody than somebody who perhaps sees it as hate. So how will we ultimately navigate some of those sensitivities when it comes to what one person would deem as an act of hate and another would, because of the symbol, and another would deem that that symbol is not the case for them?
Ms. Arnold?
Thank you, Chair Galloway, to Councillor Jowett's question. So, that is a very compelling aspect of this issue. As outlined on page 46 of the report, staff is recommending that there be an exploration of strategies, including public education opportunities with the Anti-Racism Advisory Working Group, which could address the issue that you've raised in terms of awareness, education, and being informed about what some of these symbols may mean to different people.
And so I understand, and even when I read the report, yes, I understand that aspect of it. I just, I do believe that we have actually people in our communities who are going to be writing in about this, because
Helen, you've frozen. Maybe you can turn your camera off.
symbols that mean something, something very. So will we have to look at, Ms. Arnold? Maybe this is part of it, but would we have to be looking at intent?
Ms. Arnold, did you get all that, or do you want?
I got the last part of it. I think like central to the public education would be for people with expertise in this area to be taking a look at that. So, as a lawyer, I really can't address those nuances of this complex issue. And so that's why staff is recommending that this matter be referred to the working group for them to look at these issues and these opportunities to address public education.
Thanks. I understand it's a process and it might take some time. Thank you.
Councillor Kiefer.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Ms. Arnold and staff for researching this and looking into it. Having read the report, it's it's clear that there's very limited things that we can do on the municipal level with regards to this. And it seems to me, and my question is to Ms. Arnold, I think I know the answer, that anything that comes out of this will either come out through the working group, of course, but needs a further, I think, bump, if you will call it that, from the federal government in terms of higher court or legislation even to get anywhere on this, to get rid of these hate symbols and racism issues that are so disturbing across the board. So, Ms. Arnold, I don't know if you could comment on that.
Yes, through you, Chair Galloway, to Councillor Kiefer's question. Absolutely. Hence the recommendation on the report for the immediate step. Staff is recommending to Council that we direct a request to the provincial and federal governments to address this issue.
Thank you very much.
Okay, it's moved by Councillor Kiefer, seconded by Councillor Lorentz. If you would vote on the recommendation on page 44, please. You can use your hand too if you want, Councillor Clark. And that's carried. Thank you. The next item is the GRT MobilityPLUS service review implementation on page 53 of the report. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just having a hard time wrapping my head around how expanding types of eligibility categories would ease demand. How would expanding something reduce the demand?
Mr. Zink or Mr. Malcolm?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll defer the question to Neil Malcolm, our Assistant Director. He worked closely with our consultant to help us with this report, so turn it over to Neil for response.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Zink. Yeah, so through expanding eligibility criteria, it's really about functional abilities. So as people apply for MobilityPLUS service, we're going to do a much more comprehensive job of looking at functional abilities. So a person's abilities or ability to travel on a certain type of service, whether it's ION, conventional, or MobilityPLUS, will dictate what type of service they get from MobilityPLUS. We haven't done that in the past. We have limited categories of conditional, unconditional, and temporary. Now we really want to look at broadening the categories so that if I'm able and have the functional ability to take ION to my appointment or to a service, then that's the trip we will provide through our family of services response. If my functional limitations, as I'm assessed for service, mean that I can only take door-to-door MobilityPLUS service, then that's the trip that we will provide. So the categories really speak to how people can travel and how they do travel through the region on our family of services. So more categories mean people can travel based on their abilities.
So we're not just expanding the categories, we're expanding the travel options that people have. We're not just assuming that it's all MobilityPLUS.
Yeah, absolutely. That's correct. Through you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Councillor Jowett.
Thank you, Chair Galloway. I was wondering if staff could turn my video back on. It seems the host has turned me off, and I have had my internet upgraded and I haven't had any problems. So I'm hoping that you can turn me back on now that it's whatever happened, I'm sure. Thank you.
Yeah, you did freeze the last time.
Yep, I know.
Okay. Okay, well, that was all. You didn't have a question, Alan? Okay, sorry. Councillor McGarry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to clarify the types of trips. I know that I think people that were using the service were a bit frustrated, but that sometimes they couldn't get out to do their daily activities because they were not prioritized because it wasn't a medical appointment. So for clarification with the report, and I really appreciate the fact that you are taking a look at this, or that we all are, and that we're expecting some improvement to the service for those that are using it. But will it mean then ultimately that anybody that feels that they can use the service will be able to do so in a more robust way and have more options available for taking trips that are are for anything other than medical appointments?
Go ahead. Through you, Mr. Chair. Absolutely. So in the past, we had a significant number of subscription trips, which were, pre-booked and, basically trips that were given for medical, dental, or for other specific appointments. So we were booking trips by purpose. So under AODA alignment, we're really going to look at trip purpose is not a reason or a criteria we'll look at for booking trips. So in the past, pre-COVID, those that were looking for on-demand travel for non-medical appointments or other reasons to move about the region, they were having trouble booking trips because we had such a high number of subscription trips. By capping the number that will be subscription and not looking at trip purpose as the reason why people are allowed access to travel, it's a fair and much more equitable approach to giving service to all persons that become registered MobilityPLUS clients and getting them travel more availability on demand to book those trips. So by making these changes, and it's a suite of changes and they're significant, it will, we believe, open up access to those looking for travel for other purposes.
And I can't be more supportive of that approach. Thanks very much.
Okay, it's moved by Councillor Sean, seconded by Chair Redmond. If you would vote on the recommendation on page 53. And that's carried. Thank you. The next report is the approval of the updated Grand River Source Protection Plan on page 63. There's a recommendation there. Any questions to Ms. Kudasek or staff? Councillor Schatz?
Thank you. And I think I've asked this before, but I'll just make my point again. So we're looking at sources that we are currently going to access for water. Should we not be looking at sources that we may want to access in the future because the way it needs to be protective is not a short-term issue?
Ms. Kudasek, are you there on the call? Or there you are, thanks.
Yes, through the Water Supply Master Plan, we look at our long-term needs for water, and through that we can identify what well capture zones or well areas that we need, potentially how it would affect the well capture zones. And this process that we're bringing for you today is the process where we now have a well that has been constructed and now needs to be included in the source protection planning. So this is the process through the Ministry of Environment that we need to follow. And it now, as we have constructed the well, it now, before we can put it into operation, becomes part of the source protection plan. And we're following the guidelines through the province on source protection. And we will have each year approximately 5 to 10 wells that we will be including into our source protection plan as we decommission some wells and we bring new wells forward.
Mr. Schmidt?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So this, as Nancy said, is a legislated requirement. So the definitions and the protection provided is legislated. But many of our programs are actually put in place and implemented regardless of whether there's a well in that location. So our rural water quality program, for instance, in Elmira, some of the work that was done with the contamination there and our role on any contaminated sites in the cities, those may not be in a wellhead protection area, but we still participate and we still work on cleaning up the water in those areas. The region has taken a stand in all the time I've been at the region. Our stand has been that any water that is underground within the region has the potential to be drinking water and should be protected.
Thank you. I agree.
Thanks, Councillor Sean. Councillor Jowett?
Thank you. So I'm sorry if my screen freezes again. I haven't had any problem all weekend. We've been up and down the watershed, long distance, all kinds of videos. So I'm hoping that that's the end of it. Anyway, I do want to remind everyone how critically fragile the watershed approach is right now. Specifically, water protection, source water protection is of great importance. And when we are going to look at these reconditioned wellheads, I'm hoping that we can continue the watershed approach in its real relevance, in that all communities are starting to look for water source, and all old wellheads and reconditioned wellheads are on the table now. I know that we do some testing to make sure that there's no harm to different neighboring water bodies, and I think what I'm hoping is that Eric and his team can continue to look at cumulative effect of waterhead reconditioning. Certainly, if there's a community over in one geographic section of the watershed who is reconditioning a wellhead, and then this community in the middle has somebody on the other side of them reconditioning a wellhead. The testing that we are doing in isolation, I'm hoping is being broadened for greater impact, and that might not always be something that can be done proactively. It's something that may have to be done reactively as we see sources depleting in between the neighboring communities. So it's just something that was brought up when I was sitting at a source protection meeting, and I'm hoping that we're laying some work down so that we can make sure we can continue those studies appropriately.
Okay. The motion is on page 63, is moved by Councillor Nowak, seconded by Councillor McGarry. You would vote. And that's carried. The next item is the Environmental Registry of Ontario posting the proposed blue box regulation update on page 66 of the report, of the agenda package, rather. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. One of the things that I think councillors hear, concerns from the community, is that we don't have a mandate for doing waste pickup or recycling for multi-res and businesses. And I think there's some reference in this report to that expanding. I wonder if someone can talk further to how that's envisioned to look.
Mr. Ashenau.
Hi, through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so the intention through this regulation and the changes, at least with respect to blue box recycling, is that multi-residential properties of any size will be captured and will be part of the program on a go-forward basis. From a commercial side, schools, private and public, are also captured, but I guess the larger, what we would call the IC&I sector, or the industrial, commercial, institutional, or business sector, is intended to be tackled separately under a different policy program in terms of the recycling. So yes, there is an opportunity, and there will be expansion of recycling processes and the payment of such through a producer responsibility program post 2026.
I think that that will be a big relief to people in the community. We hear more and more people are moving into multi-res type housing, and this has been experienced by a lot of people as a real gap. So I'm glad to hear that.
Okay, no further questions. The recommendation on page 66 is moved by Councillor Jowett and seconded by Councillor Jaworski. And that's carried. Thank you. We have two other items, other business items for the open session. And the first is that is a COVID-19 update. So I'll ask Dr. Wong or Mr. Lochner to provide that. Mr. Lochner. Oh, Dr. Wong. Good morning, Dr. Wong.
Yes, good morning, everyone. So today I'm going to provide a verbal update.
on the status of COVID in our community. So we continue to be in a serious situation. Even though we've had a few days where the numbers were on average a little lower than in the previous week, we do know the provincial lab system has recently experienced some backlog, and the Grand River site was not able to test yesterday in order to move to its new Glasgow site. So I would not be surprised to see increased numbers in the coming days. When there are high caseloads in a community, like we have in the lockdown and red zones, we cannot expect a quick retreat of numbers. The natural progression of COVID is exponential growth. So even if case growth continues, but it slows, that is a sign that measures are starting to have an effect. So we need to continue to push on so that the rate of growth continues to slow and eventually starts to decline. Right now, we continue to have high levels of COVID transmission. We are still firmly in the red zone. And that is with the backdrop of Ontario reporting daily case numbers, which on average continue to climb as well. Rates continue to grow in multiple areas of the province. As you may have heard, all 3 hospitals in our area now have COVID outbreaks, which further strains their capacity. We are also starting to see the number of long-term care homes and retirement homes go into outbreak, although they are still relatively small and well controlled. But again, we see that in other areas of the province, the situation has become a lot more dire. Last week, the Long-Term Care Commission of Ontario said that since October 23rd, over 100 homes were experiencing an outbreak and more than 300 residents had died. So those numbers are higher now than they were last week. And this is another reason we need to continue to push on, even if our outbreaks are not as significant as they are in other areas of the province right now. So I'm happy, though, to report that Council's advocacy has had a positive impact. The province sent additional case and contact staff to us this past weekend. They have also hired a recruiter who has found some candidates for us to interview, which we'll start interviewing this week. And finally, they are in the process of hiring and training case managers, skilled case managers or case investigators. And early in the new year, when the first group of these case managers will be ready to deploy to health units, we will be among the first health units to receive this staff. So once again, I'm very grateful to Council for their advocacy efforts on our behalf. So to close, I'd just like to again reiterate that we need to continue to act. The higher the daily number of new cases, the more unstable the situation is. That is, the easier it is to tip the scales and resume growth at an accelerated pace. So we need to continue to dramatically reduce our social interactions. So 3 things. Please, I'm asking our community not to have non-essential social interactions with people outside of our immediate households. I'm asking our residents to only go out for essential purposes. And lastly, when our residents do shop online or in person, to please support our local businesses. Thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Wong. Any questions to Dr. Wong or staff regards to this? The one question I had, Dr. Wong, and you may not be able to answer this. It's a communications issue, and I don't know if there's any communication staff on the call, but have any other regions or health districts done a quick mailer to the houses and to all residences? And the reason I ask that is that in my experience, while you put out your pleas and you put out your guidelines, and the media picks it up to a certain extent, there are a huge number of people in our community that are really kind of disconnected from all those means of communication. They don't read the paper, they don't watch the television news, they don't listen to the radio. And I suspect it's maybe even the majority of people. So while some people are very diligent and very concerned about this, I just have this sense that there's a large number of people in the community that are kind of disconnected and don't understand the gravity of the situation, and whether or not there's certainly a cost associated with this, whether or not some kind of a direct hand-delivered mailer, there are services that provide that, might be something that we might consider. And whether or not, my question is whether or not other municipalities may have, and maybe somebody on staff could check some of our other regions to see if they've done a direct residential communication through mail, ad mail, or or delivery by a delivery service to get the message out to everyone.
Yeah, so thanks for the question. It's a very good one. And I do see Julie Kaplesh from our communications team who's with us today, so I'll pass it over to her.
Okay, thanks.
I'm sorry, I missed half of the question.
So Julie, my premise is that the situation is grave, and the communications have been so inclined. But there's a huge number of people in the community that I don't know if we are getting to them through regular media. They don't subscribe to the paper. They don't watch the news, and they just maybe are not as nearly informed about the gravity of the situation, and whether or not a direct mailer of some sort, other municipalities, whether or not we know other municipalities maybe have tried that, or if that's effective or not, and something we might want to consider. Obviously some cost associated with it, but if it was appropriate, it might not be a bad strategy if others have used it and it's effective.
I'm connected to the other communicators in the other health units, and we actually have a phone call each week on Thursdays. So I can take that to that group and see if others have had success with that, and we'll look into it for our own health unit and see if it makes sense for us.
Oh, that'd be great. I mean, I don't know if we have to make that decision, or as a Board of Health, or whether or not that's something staff can do. But I'd be interested to know whether or not that's being done, or whether or not you think it's effective. But that's maybe a discussion for another time. But I thank you for looking into that. Councillor or Chair Redmond.
Thank you, Chair Galloway. Sort of a shout out, the bus terminal drive-through testing site. Anybody who is watching local media will know that it's up and running today, and it's by appointment only. And I think that is a real shout out and a testament to the collaboration between the region and Grand River Hospital. So that's really good news. And while it's not sort of your area of jurisdiction, I know, Dr. Wong, that you work really closely with Dr. Sharon Ball, as well as Lee Fairclough. And I wonder if you'd be willing to make a comment on the outbreaks in our hospitals, because it seems to me that it's sort of farther upstream than some of the cases, but I think a continuing concern for the community that we do have outbreaks in all three hospitals.
Yes, thank you for the question, Chair Redmond. So it's not surprising. We see this in other hospitals in the province as well. It is really what you can expect to happen when community transmission reaches a high level like it has reached in our community. What I do know is that the hospitals have excellent infection prevention and control teams. And the key thing now is, they're doing everything that they need to do in order to bring the outbreaks under control. So it's not surprising that we have outbreaks. I'm also, aware that their teams are doing what they need to try to bring them under control as quickly as possible. And I would say this is and this is sorry, I just lost my train of thought there. Hospitals have very strict measures to help protect patients as well as staff, and I feel that they're doing everything that they can to bring these outbreaks as quickly as possible under control. And so, it overall, what it does is it does strain further the capacity of the hospitals, but they're on top of it.
And if I may, just one supplemental, Dr. Wong, you continue to provide outstanding leadership with Lee Fairclough as well as Dr. Ball. And I know that one of the sources of a lot of emails that Council is getting as members of the Board of Health is actually from businesses. And I know you've been very measured in your response, that we haven't been in red that long. You have issued some Section 22 orders, but we need to continue to see how that unfolds. Again, your acknowledgement that hospitals being overloaded is somewhat inevitable when you see the spikes in the community. I'm just wondering, and I don't know if you want to answer it or if Sandy Stevens or Aldo Franco is on, but I keep telling businesses that they're the people that are trying to ensure that businesses can remain open, and whether or not you like the rules set forth by the province, it's inspection and making sure that people are adhering to it that is actually keeping restaurants and retail spaces open.
Yes, I'm just wondering, I wouldn't know if perhaps Bruce Lochner would have some comments, or if Rod Regier is on the line. I don't think Sandy's on, just trying to look.
Mr. Lochner.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Dr. Wong. The inspections, the education with our business owners is intended to be supportive. And we know that there's a lot of community spread, and we do know that it's having a positive impact, these kinds of education and enforcement approaches. We are working, and Rod is here, very closely with our small businesses. I know there's a lot of frustration out there with restaurant owners and small businesses, and rightly so, that many of them are taking the utmost precaution and steps, and yet there's still spread. I think Dr. Wong has, I know she's provided data that a lot of this happens in break rooms. And again, I don't want to be specific to any sector, then it happens in break rooms in many organizations, in industries and small businesses, in the hospitality industry, in other sectors, and that's where we really need to prevent the spread. People are tired, right? I see this in places that I go into where people are just exhausted, and I don't think people are intentionally trying to do this, but it is happening, and that's where the spread is occurring. So we do need everyone on board, and as you said, Chair Redmond, the rules are there for a reason. The inspection and education's there for a reason, and it's working in some cases, and in other cases we continue to see spread in the same spots.
Okay. Mr. Regier, did you want to jump in on that?
No, I think that is definitely the core message that we want to convey. We remain, we'll continue to work really closely with the business community, and as we'll discuss over the next little while, we're designing a number of programs to support increased education and an approach to the
the implementation of our regulations, which is sustainable with the business community.
Councillor McGarry.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. My question is really regarding some of the provincial restrictions right now. And as we know, there's a certain number of people that can go into a business or a gym. I think it's 10 through the facility. And it doesn't seem to take into account the size of the facility. So it can be either a small gym or a humongous gym. Or a small restaurant versus a very large scale restaurant, and the restrictions are the same. And I know this is up to the province, but do you know if there's any conversation at the provincial level to sort of address that, or are they likely to stick with the numbers that are currently?
Thank you for the question, Councillor McGarry. So the challenge is the measures in the red zone are stricter than the measures in the orange zone, right? Whereas before it was maximum 50, now it's maximum 10. So if you take the limit of 10 away, then you're basically potentially allowing a very high number of people in the premise because of the premises size. So really these are these are sectors of our economy where, despite their very best efforts, and we recognized how much effort they've put into the precautions in their settings, but they are higher risk. When you take a look at the overall body of evidence, they are higher risk, and that is why they are under the escalating restrictions as you go up the color zones. So, the next level in lockdown is closure. So it is in line with the idea that for these areas, or for these settings rather, with higher risk, intrinsically higher risk due to the type of activity that occurs in these settings, there would be escalating restrictions as you go up the color zones. So I anticipate that wouldn't really be changed in order to allow for the numbers to really depend only on capacity, because that can be very significant in cases of facilities with large spaces.
Okay, Councillor Jowett.
Thank you, Dr. Wong. I know that you've gone down this road before with us to make it clear, but just so that I am able to share the messaging tomorrow on a Zoom, what is the current role of the Minister of Labour with regard to employment spaces thus far? Are they continuing to inspect? I'm not quite sure if they are. Are they adding anything to education and awareness? Or is public health basically taking over all of this particular part of things? So where's the delineation of responsibility so that I can make it clear?
Sure. Thanks for the question. So the Ministry of Labor continues to have a role always with respect to workplace health and safety. So worker health and safety. There's legislative requirements put out by the Ministry of Labor for all workplaces in the region and in Ontario, for workplaces to have measures that they need to take to protect workers in the workplace. So Ministry of Labor always has that. Public health will not ever take over that jurisdiction and that responsibility. What happened recently was the province put together additional inspectors led by the Ministry of Labor to go out into different areas of the province to assist the local enforcement partners. And in this case, local enforcement is regional bylaw, lower tier municipal bylaw or area municipal bylaw, and regional police and public health inspectors. So those four groups make up local enforcement officers. And so what happened is in the last 2 weeks, the Ministry of Labor's additional officers joined our local officers, and they added to our enforcement, our education and enforcement activities across the region. They did a 2-week blitz. And now they've moved on to Hamilton, which is having similar concerning growth rates as we are, to do a 2-week blitz there. And we've been in talks with them, and they're looking into how soon they can come back into our region to, again, help with our enforcement partners to continue that education and enforcement where necessary. So that's been an added resource from the province that we've advocated, continue to be deployed as much as possible in our region. But even when they're not here, we still work with the Ministry of Labor when we have situations of COVID in workplace settings where, there could be workplace worker health and safety concern. So Ministry of Labor is still responsible for that. And a lot of the requirements that the workplaces have to follow right now are under provincial legislation as set by ministries like the Ministry of Labor. So I don't know if that helps, and if you have any further questions.
No, that's perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay, once again, thanks, Dr. Wong and all the staff for the great work that's being done. The second other business item, Chair Whitman, I think, wants to bring us some information on Indigenous training.
Thank you, Chair Galloway. Many of you joined me for an Indigenous education training session on Monday morning with Dr. Darren Thomas. It was absolutely outstanding. It was parts 1 and 2. There is a second part 3 and 4, which have not been scheduled yet. But for anybody that has these educational sessions in your calendar, if you missed the first one, there are 2 more opportunities. And it led to an authentic but uncomfortable conversation as Dr. Thomas covered off stereotypes, misinformation, the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Initiative, and as well as the cultural, social, and political histories. And for all of us, I think we walked away with new learnings and new understandings. We talked about the residential schools and the 60 Scoop. And it's all of those things that probably none of us, if we were educated in Ontario, ever heard in our history class. So it was an outstanding initiative. And as I said, there will be more opportunities. And I encourage everyone to participate. And this is for council, area council members, as well as staff. Thank you.
Councillor Foxton.
Thank you. And through the chair, I'd like to echo the Chair Redmond's comments. It was an amazing day, an eye-opener. And I will be asking staff to work with me with a motion to come forward. And one of the part of the motion will be that the Indigenous people be recognized as human beings. Under the Indian Act, they are not. And I found that shocking and deplorable, that they do not have human being status under our government. So I would like to work with staff on that motion to come forward. The second motion I would like to come forward, and working with staff as well. And once you've all been through the sessions, you'll understand nowhere in Ontario or even in Canada should people go without drinking water. If I remember correctly, I believe it's been since 2008 that the one community, the Indigenous community, have been boiling under a boil water. So again, I'm going to ask for a motion to be put forward, or a resolution that we can send to all municipalities saying this is deplorable in this day and age and in our society. So those 2 things I'd like to work with staff and have those come forward so that we can stand with others to say all people have human status. And there is no way this should ever exist in any document in Canada. And also that all deserve the right to clean water.
Okay, no other business. It's moved by Councillor Harris, seconded by Councillor Foxton to go into closed session. If you would vote accordingly. And that's